we can now make a prediction on how many years Johnny Somali may stand behind bars. Of course, this is Legal Mindset. We teach you to be your own judge. I'm Andrew Esquire, American attorney living over here in Asia. And on top of this Johnny Somali, Ramzi Khalid Ismail case in Seoul, South Korea. Now, our members of the Somali conviction team, that is a team of people that is working to put away Johnny Somali, has been doing a lot of work. And one of the things that we did not previously translate, which we now have translated and over for you guys, is actually the sentencing guidelines. I hadn't seen or heard about these until very recently, actually, because we're just moving into the phase where they become relevant. That is the phase as we look at guilt and innocence and as we look at what the punishment will ultimately be. And sentencing guidelines are commonly used around the world, including in the United States. We have sentencing guidelines in most jurisdictions for criminal acts, criminal penalties, which generally say, okay, if a criminal has these characteristics, this is the level of punishment we give them. And generally what that is meant to do is to separate out first-time criminals or criminals that might have some, mitigating factors, that is lessening factors, versus criminals that are really bad, that have aggravating factors. We're talking about repeat criminals, people that do things particularly heinous. So you want to punish a little bit differently, and there are some guidelines for that in most places, and Korea indeed has them. So we found those, and we're going to get into that today. And of course, I've got a little presentation for you. In that, I do want to give you some disclaimers. These are based on the 2024 sentencing guidelines. So there will be an update in July of 2025. So we're going to get an update before the trial is over. Of course, as you know, the next trial date for Johnny Somali is in August, so we'll have an update before the sentencing. The sentencing for Johnny Somali, we don't have a date on that. My best guess is very late in 2025, if not in 2026, when he's ultimately found guilty on all charges and sentenced. I think that's my estimate. But that said, of course, things can change, so this is my estimate as of date, and it is also just an interpretation based on the reading by myself and the Somali conviction team. It's our understanding, which once again you need to understand may vary from the interpretation and ultimate decision by the judge, and also understand that guidelines can sometimes be varied from, so the judge may choose to put more weight in certain things and ignore other things. That's at the discretion of the judge. So that said, let's jump into it and look at some of the documents that relate to this. And we have what we have is we have all of these in a kind of PowerPoint format for each of the, I have a PowerPoint for overall, but we have these in Adobe over here, and these are pretty good layouts in these tabs of what's going on with the sentencing for each charge. Now, there are a lot of statutes that relate to how you calculate the math, including a statute that says, okay, you take the first charge and you can go up to the maximum on that charge, but for subsequent charges that are the same charge, right, they're the same type of charge, like obstruction, like deepfakes, you take 50% of what would be the range for the charge for each additional one. And so the way that would work out is saying, okay, well, in this case, we're going to take for the aggravated minimum, right? For example, for obstruction, we're going to take 1 year for the first count, and then we've got 2 more. So that would be 6 months, which 6 months, 1 year, add that together, 2 years for the aggravated minimum. So there's 3 categories I'm going to walk you through here, and that is aggravated, minimum, and default. And just so you understand what this means, mitigated means there's a bunch of factors that make the defendant look good. They're very sympathetic. They're someone that the court should have pity on. This is a good boy. This is a good boy. Default is just a normal boy. It's a normal person. It's a regular person. Maybe they have both good and bad. Maybe kind of the good and the bad kind of cancel each other out. That's just kind of the default position. And then you have aggravated. And then you have the bad boys. And Ramzi Khalid Ismail, as we're going to see, has a lot of aggravating factors and not a lot of mitigating factors. A lot of those bad boy points, not a lot of the good boy points. So let's just read through some of these mitigating factors, and they're very similar for obstruction, deepfake sentencing. I'll just go through some of them here on this abbreviated fast facts version. But if you want to see me go through all of them, you can, of course, check out my full-length live. So let's look at some factors. Cases where there's a special reason to consider participation in the crime. Cases where the motive for the crime can be considered. Cases where the degree of power, hierarchy, or obstruction of business is minor. And cases where the crime is committed through negligence. If the actor is deaf or mute or has diminished capacity, right? If they were passively participating, right? If there was genuine remorse. Now, let's look over here on aggravating factors. When the offender actively led or directed commission of the crime, when committing the crime was particularly heinous, when the crime targeted multiple or unspecified victim and was repeatedly committed over a period. Did Somali do that? We'll continue. When the degree of obstruction was severe, when there's instigation of a subordinate, when there's a blameworthy motive for the crime, a motive perhaps like internet fame and clout and trying to farm this for clout and money, a repeat offense, previously convicted. So by the way, remember, with 3 charges, even if they're in the same type of crime, that's a repeat offense. So number 1 is first conviction, then second and third. Next is heterogeneous recidivism, different category of repeat offense. And then there's harm caused during settlement attempts. That doesn't count. And same category, prior prison sentence. So you've got, in all of this, I consider seeing more aggravating factors, right? Such as actively leading it, right? Committing a kind of crime spree and also having horrible motive. That kind of falls more in aggravating than I think mitigating. For deepfakes, there's also a, oh, and by the way, let's go into the punishment here. So for a mitigated case, it's fine up to 8 months. For default case, it's 6 months up to a year. And then aggravated 1 year and 3.5. Now, mind you, this is just for one charge. So we have a summary table that puts this all together for you because we've got, remember, 3 obstruction charges. So we'll do the math for you at the end. And then we've got distribution of false images. That's deepfake. So there's 3 categories, and Johnny Somali is going to fall in the last one, distribution for commercial purposes. So if you create a deepfake, that's category 1. That's kind of one of the lighter ones. Then if you distribute it, that's category 2. But if you distribute it for commercial purposes, meaning you are making money on it, which Johnny Somali was, that is category number 3. So this is going to get this level of punishment, which is higher than production and distribution because you're distributing it and making money. So let's look at the mitigating factors for deepfakes. If there's particularly extenuating circumstances for the involvement, if the content of the edited, synthesized, processed, or reproduced materials is difficult to recognize, well, that's not true. If there's genuine remorse, if there's no prior criminal record, if there's general cooperation with the investigation. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, at every turn, Johnny Somali has said F you to the folks at law enforcement, at Seoul Law Enforcement, repeatedly over and over and over again. If you have passive participation, and then if you have somebody who's deaf, mute, diminished capacity, voluntarily surrendering, etc., and if the victim gave a waiver of punishment, that is not what happened here in this case. Next, if there's a large amount of profit, if there's harm caused during settlement negotiations, meaning coming after the victim, coming after the person that you're trying to settle with. Let's look at here. The method was heinous. If there's a blameworthy motive for the crime, once again, profit in internet clout. If the crime targeted unspecified or multiple victims or was repeated over a considerable period. If there's a vulnerable victim. If the crime caused severe harm to the victim or instigation of a subordinate. So I think that in this, you see more aggravating than you see more mitigating as well for the distribution of false images. So what does that mean for our overall time? Where's our count at given all of that stuff? Well, you can go over to, we'll go over here to our little presentation and I'll show you. We've got at least 6 months on the clock here. So let's look at this table. This puts everything together. This adds it all up and kind of gives you the different quadrants. So if this was absolutely mitigated, if the judge thought that Johnny was a good boy, then likely the minimum, assuming he is guilty for everything, the minimum would likely be around 6 months in behind bars, because deepfakes, the minimum there would be 6 months. Obstruction, they could give a fine. So let's assume they give a fine. That would be 6 months. That would be 6 months. The default, that means if they're neutral, if it's neither good nor bad, right? 1 year for obstruction, 1 year, 6 months for deepfakes. That's 2 years and 6 months in a neutral position. Now let's go to if the judge thinks it's aggravated. And we have a lot of factors pointing towards aggravation. 2 years for obstruction, 2 years and 3 months for deepfakes, 4 years and 3 months as a minimum if the judge finds this aggravated. Let me say this once again. If Johnny Somali is, the judge finds that this is actually aggravated, the crimes were aggravated, not default, not mitigated, we're looking at 4 years and 3 months minimum. And that ranges up to 12 years based on 5 years as the maximum punishment you can get for obstruction and 7 years for deepfakes. That's because the way some of the statutes work, they actually limit the punishment for compound crimes for similar type crimes. So the maximum is 5 and 7. So that maxes him out at 12. He could also technically, I guess, give 12 years and 30 days for the Minor Crimes Act, but that's neither here nor there. So we're looking at 12 years as that maximum there. Now, one last thing, there is the possibility of a suspended sentence. That's something that some people have kind of talked about or mentioned because it's something akin to like a parole system, or we might view it that way, like in kind of like a USI. But that is very unlikely because just like with this, there are factors for the mitigation and aggravation of a suspended sentence, like whether it should happen or should not. And when we actually look at those factors for a suspended sentence, and we look at the consideration for a suspended sentence, which is also found in the same guidelines, we see that it indeed usually falls on the side of aggravating and not on mitigating. So if you wanted a suspended sentence, you would want a lot of stuff here. Like, for example, seeing that the crime was spontaneously committed, that there was genuine remorse, that there are clear social ties, that there's no prior sentences, that the defendant's health is poor, that there's passive participation. So they were an accomplice. They weren't the one that did it. If they substantially restored damages, paid for everything. If they, let's see here, let's add some other ones here. If they have no other prior convictions of the same type. Let's see, if there are particularly mitigating circumstances regarding the participation of the crime. So it wasn't that bad in the overall context. If the content of the recorded material, what's seen, is not easily identifiable or ambiguous. If there's substantial measures taken to prevent further dissemination of harm, and if there's kind of voluntary surrender and kind of voluntary disclosure. These aren't things we have. The motive for the crime is reprehensible. Check. The crime victimized vulnerable individuals. Well, we've got a lot of women, we've got a lot of children, got a lot of folks out there that were targeted. If the crime targets unspecified or multiple victims or has been repeatedly committed over a considerable period, we do have that. And if the method of committing the crime is particularly egregious, showing that to everybody. And then beyond that, here's a big one: absence of genuine remorse, lack of social ties, no effort to restore damages, substantial illicit gains, which we do have, leading role, concealment or attempted concealment of evidence, and causing harm during settlement attempts. We've got a lot of those aggravating factors which lead to not giving a suspended sentence. So I don't think a suspended sentence is likely in the case of Johnny Somali. That's my read on that. But what do you guys think? Leave a comment below. What do you think about the sentencing range? Do you think sort of that range of up to 12 years there is fair? Do you think you should get more? What do you think? Let me know, and I'll catch you all later.
Are you guys enjoying the stream today?